Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to this month's edition of History Club. My name is Joe Walsh, and I'm here with Martina Hanna. And thanks very much for agreeing to come on, Martina. The History Club is part of the LGBTQIA plus Heritage Project, which is in partnership with HERENI, Car Friend, and the Rainbow Project, and is kindly funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And tonight we're going to be talking with Martina about a range of stuff, mainly about campaigning and for equality and things like that. So Martina, if you want to introduce yourself and we'll make a wee start.
Okay, my name, as Joe said, is Martina Hanna, and I have been chair of HERENI for a period of one term and one term only. I joined the board 2 years after I retired, and when I was invited to become chair of the board, I said that I would only do so if the entirety of the board were content. Even if one person had a dissent on that matter, then I wouldn't be chair. But I have to say, it was, everybody said, yes, we would love you to be chair. But because I was being sort of brought in as chair on a basis of vote from the board, I'm one of these people that is very involved and has been very involved with a lot of boards. And I actually, at one point, worked on a 5-year term to the Commissioner for Public Appointments. So would have been a policy advisor to her and would have advised on how boards are made, what the rules and conditions are in relation to the code of practice for public appointments. So I'm a great believer that equality is equality. And if you're going to be the chair of a board, it's because of the range of skills that you have and the range of skills you can bring to that board. And really what balance you can bring to a board as well. So I agreed to be chair, but I was very strict on my conditions that I would be chair for one term, and then the board, as a board, would choose how it would move forward. And I'm very glad to say that Helen Coburn is now the chair of HERENI, and she has an awful lot of background experience in working with the community, in working with the board, because she was secretary to our board there for quite a wee while as well. And I'm delighted she's there. And I also have a habit of rabbiting on. So that's my background with HERENI. And I came onto the board really through Karen McCann, and because we met at a women's rights event, and after I'd retired, and we had that conversation. And I had been involved through work with sexual orientation equality, gender equality, and disability equality. And my biggest heart for equality matters is with the sexual orientation community, because I feel that that community has had more of an uphill struggle in getting their equality marked and in getting their equality to be seen. And it's not to underestimate other inequalities that everybody else suffers. I just feel that there's a more uphill battle. Yeah.
So it didn't take much convincing for Cara to get you involved?
No. And prior to that, Joe, I had been on an environmental board for 8 years. And I am a great believer in when your terms are up, you move on and allow the board to refresh. So I'd actually left that board when I retired, and there was a good space between that and me joining HERENI.
Brilliant. So back in the early days, Martina, what was your background?
Why did I want to do all of this?
Yes. Why did you want to put yourself through it?
Right, okay. We've had conversations about this before. I was born in 1961, so I'm a child of the 60s. I'm a child of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and I'm a very, very proud Ardoin girl. That's where I was born, that's where I was raised. And then when I was 8 years of age, that would have been 1969, my parents lost their house. They lost it completely. And there was no going back. The house was destroyed. And the family was separated. The family then moved to emergency accommodation. And I could see that people really generally did not like each other. And it wasn't because of who the other person was, it was because who they perceived them to be, or indeed because of fear, of not understanding the point of view of other people. So through the Troubles, we moved to Andersonstown, and it was very, very challenging. It was very, very difficult for my mother and my father to pick that ball up again, to keep the family safe, to keep the family in an area where they could be educated, where they could have a normal life. And there was no such thing as normality during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It just did not exist. And then I, through luck, would have it joined School of Music, Belfast School of Music, which was one of the best places to ever be if you loved music, because it didn't matter what race, creed, religion, what your beliefs were, what colour you were, as long as you were playing an instrument and you were playing with each other and you were playing well. And I loved it. I loved the escape from everyday life, but I also loved that escape into something that I adored.
Bit
So
of normality in the middle of
it was 3 nights a week, and I would have walked to the School of Music, which was in Donegal Pass, from the Falls Road 3 nights a week, and that was crazy. But I then went into a working environment at the age of 17, into the Northern Ireland Civil Service. And I have to say, my eyes were very, very much opened up. I worked with a team of scientists who were brilliant. They were all lovely. And again, nobody cared what anybody was, as long as they were doing their job. But when I moved then into mainstream civil service, and I'm sure other people have experienced it as well, your gender was your gender. As a female, I made tea 3 times a day for the entirety of the office, and mostly for all the men. And I remember going to meetings where people would ask you, because you were the female in the room, to make the cup of tea. Or could you get this? Could you go and get the photocopy? And it didn't really matter what grade you were. If you were a female, you were a female. I saw what women suffered. And I saw what potential was being lost. Now that's all changed. We've had Section 75 has come out. You've got all of the protected categories. But I also saw what the LGBTQ plus community was suffering. And I actually worked with several people who found it very, very hard to come out, even in the office. And that's wrong. It's just simply unacceptable. You go into an office environment and you go into work, you go in to do a job, you go in to give of your experience. And if you're lying dying as a result of a car accident and the ambulance turns up, you're not going to say to the paramedic, oh, by the way, are you LGBTQ plus? You can't treat me. Oh, by the way, are you Catholic? Are you Protestant? You can't treat me. You Jew? No, don't want you. You take the expertise and you take the human being and you take the love and you take what they can provide for you. So, as I say, through the years in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, the Labour government came in, and the Labour government were very good at pushing equality laws. And before I talk about Labour, that's not from a point of view of me supporting Labour. I have no politics. And I have no politics here. I will vote for whoever I think will provide the best service for the community. And I will not vote for anybody who I know will discriminate against people. So, but I don't have personal politics. So I'd taken a few notes. And when Peter Hain became Secretary of State in Northern Ireland, he actually negotiated and provided a small grant for the LGBTQ plus communities. And I think that grant was about £250,000. That would have been in 2006, 2007. And that was great. It was a great step forward. He also went out to consultation, or rather the department did. So all this work was going on by brilliant people in the department. And he went out to consultation, and we're going back 2006 to consultation on a sexual orientation strategy and an action plan. The action plan would have had a 3-year limit, which was quite good because it gives you a marker for whether the action plan is working. And it gives you a short period of time so that if it's not working within 3 years, you then amend, you change it. But the consultation was completed, the strategy was ready to be published, and other people will keep me right on this. I believe at that time that strategy was called Pride Not Prejudice, but I could be corrected on that. But I remember thinking one of the strategies in development had that name, and I thought it was amazing.
Yep.
I'm getting a nod here. It was Pride Not Prejudice. Yeah.
Yep. That's what we might call this podcast.
Well, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant strategy. It was a brilliant piece of consultation, and it was due to be published. And then what happened was the Assembly came back up, and you had Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley as the first and the Deputy First Minister. And they made a decision that they would develop their own sexual orientation strategy for Northern Ireland rather than have somebody from England doing it. It would be better that they would do it. That's fair enough. I can understand that. And to have ministers here involved in something that is so close to the community, that's great. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So we'll look at the timings here. And again, I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong in some of these timings.
This is a wee test for you.
So in 2007, and now albeit Peter Hain was still Secretary for State at this stage. So in 2007, both Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley, under their programme for government, gave a pledge that there would be a new sexual orientation strategy. Now, in June 2011, there was a question asked in the Assembly by a gentleman called Joe Byrne, who was the SDLP representative. And Joe said, when are we going to get this sexual orientation strategy? When are you going to bring it to the table? So remember, we're going from 2007 and this is 2011 and it still hasn't been developed. And Jonathan Bell would have been the junior minister at that stage, and that would have fallen within his portfolio. And Peter Robinson, I think, was now the First Minister in 2011. So Jonathan, to quote, said, "We have also instructed officials to meet organisations from the sector and other departments. The final consultation process will take place during early 2012 with a view to publishing a sexual orientation strategy later that year." Now, if you want to look that up, you'll find that on the Assembly website. I would not repeat some of the comments said later by other politicians, but I will leave that to the great and the good to look up if you want to look that one up. And all of that is published, spoken in the Assembly, so it's fact.
And that'll give you a good idea of the attitudes of the politicians at the time and what they were actually thinking, because they were quite free to say what they really thought.
Yeah. And it's not nice. It's not nice that, you know, if you take 1 in 10 members of the community fall into the LGBTQ plus sector, you feel abandoned, you feel unwanted, and you feel unloved. But we're talking about a timeline here on a sexual orientation strategy that in 2011 was promised that it would be there by the end of 2012, still didn't happen. So then, right, and I'm just sort of going over this again 7 years later, and you still have teams that are working on a sexual orientation strategy. So 7 years later, in 2014, a new consultation commenced, but it wasn't a consultation on the sexual orientation strategy. It was a consultation on what the public would think a sexual orientation strategy should look like and what direction it should take. And there was very positive feedback on that. And that feedback is it's all public record. So that feedback is actually available because that consultation was undertaken. Now that was 2014. And then just a few years ago, I would say about 2016, 2017 again, my memory might not be brilliant because I've had quite a rough few weeks this last wee while. But in 2016, the equality policies were dispersed. So gender, sexual orientation, and disability went to the Department for Communities. Race stayed in the Executive Office, and other policies were divided out amongst other different departments. But these policies are overarching policies. They are policies that all departments should be working on, and policies that really, really do need to be ratified and need to be moved on. So we are now, that was 2014, 2016 when the policies moved out to the different departments. And yes, there has been a range of things that have happened. You know, the Assembly has been up, the Assembly has been down, the Assembly has been up and down again, and now it's back in. But if you have, as I said, a community of at least 10% of our population and the promise of a sexual orientation strategy that has never come to fruition, then they do feel abandoned. And really my reason for moving into HERENI was to help and push the agenda forward for women. And it has been an uphill struggle. It really has been. It really has never developed. So one of the things I would say is, why is a strategy important when you've got law in place? Yes, we have Section 75. Yes, we have protected categories. But if you take the strategies that have been published, gender equality strategy, and believe me, there's work needs to be done in that. Women in Northern Ireland deserve a really, really good gender equality strategy. You have a race relations strategy, it needs to be updated. Again, people in Northern Ireland deserve a race relations strategy. You have TBUC, the Together Building a United Community strategy. What do those strategies do? They have targets. They command departments into saying what they are doing to make life better for that minority community or that minority issue, or where there's a gender imbalance to sort things out. They have targets associated with them.
So it can be measured.
So that it can be measured. And if you don't have a strategy, you don't have the targets. You might have the law, but the law can only come into effect when it is broken. But it doesn't always come into effect when it's bent or abused.
And it doesn't tell you.
And it doesn't tell you
anything that the strategy would tell you.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you if it's being, the targets are being met, or if there's any change or anything.
No. And it's just something to think about as a community. Does the community really want to push that agenda? Because they have been pushing that agenda for 18 years. Go back to 2006. It's 18 years since the Labour government consulted, and it's 17 years since the Office of the Deputy First Minister said they would publish a strategy. It just hasn't happened. HERENI, and I'll talk a little bit about HERENI because it's an organisation I am so, so proud of. We've had, over this last few years, COVID, we have had cost of living crisis, we've had all sorts of things. HERENI, as soon as COVID hit, went online and started to reach out to all the members of the community to say, you're not alone, you're not abandoned. We'll do film clubs, we'll do one-to-ones online. You need our help, here's our helpline. As a board, we as a board put in place measures to protect the team. We enabled the team to work from home. I know that it was law to work from home, but even when that law was up and down and people didn't know what the law was, we took a clear line as a board to protect the team and to enable the team to work, at that arm's length basis. But at the same time, as a board, we worked very, very closely with the team. I have to say, and I will say it very, very clearly, that under the directorship of Cara McCann, the team were well guided, and the steer that they had from that director was superb. And Cara made sure that she was keeping in touch with me as the chair of the board. Things were discussed, they were ratified. There were no decisions taken that weren't ratified by the entirety of the board. And I have to say, I don't really always believe in doing everything on a paper basis. I was going to say a paper trail, but that's not what I mean, on a paper basis. But during COVID, as a board, we got together on Zoom. We managed our meetings exceptionally well. But every decision that we made outside of the board meeting, which had to happen, was made via writing to all of the board, and then all of the board would have come back and ratified how we move forward. And that included measures that were taken during the cost of living crisis, which was horrendous. Also, as I say, during COVID, the working from home arrangements that went in. The other thing that, as a board member, that the board did during the last few years was Cara and John O'Doherty became very, very involved with Pride. And I mean really hands-on with Pride. And I know on a personal level that Cara was sitting up to the wee small hours of the morning, filling in documents, registering different things when they needed to be registered, filling in application forms when they needed to be done, and then coming across to the likes of myself and other people and saying, could you do a wee bit of proofreading just in case we've got something on this that needs just a wee bit of tweaking.
As well as her own job.
As well, this was on top of her own job, and her own job is really intense.
Yeah.
But the one thing about all of that was the board came out in full support of enabling Cara to do that, because Pride needed to work. Pride needed to be sustained. And what John and Cara both had a position on the Pride board. HERENI, as a board, took a decision that HERENI would be represented by a HERENI member of staff, even after Cara needed to step back and do other things. So we have a member of staff on the Pride board. There's just so much that's been going on in terms of trying to get a community hub for the LGBTQ+ community. Cara and our board, HERENI board, and Cara Friend also became very involved in going to meetings for that. And that is going on a continual basis. So it's lovely when an event like Pride kicks off and everybody goes along to it, and you see the events that are promoting Pride, and you see Pride Day and everybody marching through the streets of Belfast. And you look at the beauty of that day, but nobody sees all of the blood, sweat, and tears that have gone on behind making that work.
Yeah.
And you have to, the one thing I will not ever let anybody take away from the LGBTQ plus community workers, my goodness, do they give it their all, and
Value for money.
value for money indeed. So I just stepped down at our last meeting, as I say, as chair, and Helen Coburn has come in as the new chair. Charlene McKeown is the new secretary. Sorry, I apologize. Charlene McKeown is the new treasurer, and Grania Stars is the new secretary. And I was actually going to step away from the board entirely. I had said that I wouldn't, because as a chair of a board, you don't want to continue on and do anything that would undermine a new chair. And I believe really the best thing is to leave. However, the chair and I do get on very well with a good working relationship. So I have promised, in order to give her support for the next term, that I will stay on the board. But again, we got the board to approve that. So I'm a member of the HERENI board of trustees. And as I say, the new board chair, very capable lady, and I can see her adding even more value than I could ever have done. But that board now meets 4 times a year, and then once a year for its annual general meeting. And it's a very hard-working board and a great team of people, but a great team of people to work with in the organisation itself. I don't know what more I can add tonight to this, apart from the fact that since I have retired 7 years ago, I don't think I've worked harder. But anyway.
You're not allowed to retire, Martina.
Oh no, I did. I've retired now 7 years this year. But I just wish I put my chairmanship, whatever way you want to call it. We do have terms on the board, but I wouldn't swap those years again. I'm really trying to say it has been an honour and a privilege. And particularly as a heterosexual person, because one of the things that has hit me really, really strongly about the community is they don't discriminate. Doesn't matter if you're heterosexual, you can come and work on the board. And you know where I'm coming from. It's a beautiful community to work with, and one that has struggled so much they wouldn't want to see anybody else struggle.
Thank you, Martina. And do you see anything, the future of a sexual orientation strategy? What would you advise the community? Do you think we should still fight on for that and bring it up?
I actually think, because during all of this time, and I know that Monica's there listening and may or may not agree with me on this, but the community have been so involved in the different variations of what the sexual orientation strategy should be. I honestly, if it was me and it was my call in the community, I'd write my own. I would get a group of the members of the community together, write their own as they see it, and then put that to the department and just say, look, we've done all this work over the years. Here are the different iterations of what the sexual orientation strategy should have been, what it should have looked like. There's really not much difference now because it has never come to fruition. So there's an awful lot of work there that is already done. that they could develop even as their desired sexual orientation strategy. But they really, really do need to push for it. Personally, I would not let it go.
Okay, you heard it here first. Get those emails into the people that can make a difference, and send them out, and ask, where is the strategy that we were promised all those years ago, and we're still waiting. You know, we're still being made different than the other strategies that are already in place.
Well, the other strategies, and I would need to, caveat that, the other strategies have been in place. But again, the other strategies are lacking a lot of work. They're lacking a lot of development, would be the better word. There is a great will within the teams of the civil service. There are great people in there. They do a lot of work. It's getting those developed and pushed forward.
Is that because the assembly hasn't been running?
Probably because it's been up and down and up and down. And other things sort of then take place. Now, for example, we're going to have another election in Westminster, and then there will be other local elections in the next year or two as well. And once a new assembly is elected, you have to remember, it doesn't matter if it's the same parties get in. Once the manifesto of the latest election gets them elected, that's the manifesto that they work on. They don't have to stick to promises that were made years ago. So really, when politicians are going around your doors, when they're lobbying for your vote, that's when you need to badger them and say, are you going to promise me this? Are you going to give us a strategy? Are you going to do A, B, and C? And people tend to forget that, because when a politician is elected, they're elected on their manifesto. In terms of Northern Ireland, because our politics are so different, you've got a range of different manifestos in the assembly, and they don't always match. So that's a challenge as well.
Yep, we still got our work cut out for us, and we're still going to have to continue to campaign and fight for.
And there's still issues around gender equality. There's still issues around race relations. There's still issues, and they will continue on. But we need to chip away. You need to chip away for equality, and you need to shout for it. And if you look at the Northern Ireland Equality Commission's website, they're still shouting for those things, and they have a lot of strength and a lot of say. But my goodness, I think there needs to be a concerted effort.
Yeah. Excellent. Martina, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Martina, or comments, or that's raised anything for you? Yep.
Wouldn't be like me not to say something, Martina. You know, I can speak from experience in saying don't undersell your role, and don't undersell the difference that you have made as an ally to the community, both through HERENI and the work that you've done in the public sector. It isn't easy, and it certainly wasn't easy in the early days to be an ally. It isn't easy to push upstream against a policy that is emotive and very political, and particularly with the iterations of policies of politicians and governments in and out, and the hokey pokey that we had over those sort of 15, 20 years. And I agree with you that the sector shouldn't give up. Too much has been invested in it. You know, you're also right. The strategy, while has been renamed in agreement with the sector, who were part of the latest co-production of the strategy, thankfully is now the LGBTQIA plus strategy. So we got past it just being sexual orientation. And be clear. And that didn't make it any easier, because once we started to really include and look at those trans issues, you know that's where a lot of the kickback comes. So it's very difficult. We need to support that community, and I think you're absolutely right. Keep that battle. And your point as well about the strategy, when you say write your own, to some degree through co-production, it has been. But what is more important is the action plan. than the
Yes.
strategy. The strategy is what it is. What the sector need is those actual time-bound, funded, resourced actions, and all of the legwork has been done to put that there.
Yeah. And
Um,
actions can be measured, actions can be delivered, and the whole purpose of having, if you go back to the Peter Hain strategy, which probably wouldn't have the same impact if it was being put in place today, let's be honest about that. But if you go back to the Peter Hain strategy, and I keep calling it the Peter Hain strategy simply because it was his time and it's to highlight how long ago that was rather than say it was his strategy. But if you go back to
I
that,
call it mine because I wrote it for him.
but if you go back to that time, Monica, the action plan over a period of 3 years was ideal because it gives you a 3-year period to measure whether something is going to have an impact, whether the departments are, leaning into their promises, and whether or not something should change or be dropped off or added on. But and we're definitely in agreement there. The strategy is the strategy, but you don't get an action plan without a strategy.
Oh no,
for
no,
the
I
action
totally,
plan. Oh, no, no,
absolutely
no,
agree
you know
with
what I
you.
mean. We're both
Yeah.
totally in
I mean,
agreement.
I
Yeah,
can remember, at the time even when it came to having a name for it, and I called it Pride Not Prejudice, and
that's a brilliant name.
it was a bit of a kick at the time because of the amount of protests and prejudice that went on around Pride.
Yeah,
It didn't necessarily go down particularly well, but I refused to change it. And I think that was the whole point. The action plan for me was the most important thing. And also, you're right, the needs, while more varied and more recognized, it's a cross executive strategy. It's not, it's
yes,
led by, but it needs the support of all. There's so
yeah,
much justice issues, there's so many health issues, there's so many education issues. So you're right. The biggest thing that the sector can do is lobby, 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 and push to make sure that comes back onto the new programme for government because the legwork's done.
yeah. And there's something that I was reading which is actually very, very appropriate today. And I read it in the Belfast Telegraph. If I can find these notes, I do apologise if I'm keeping everybody
No worries. While you're doing that,
back.
Monica, can I just ask you to introduce yourself for people who are listening?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry.
in
My
that
name's
field?
Monica Fitzpatrick. I'm a trustee with the Rainbow Project. Like Martina, I'm a former civil servant and we go back some way. I remember you being in the public appointments office. We met regularly on the stairs in Castle Biltons up and down and had our chats then. And I'm just really passionate about that work and for the same reasons as yourself. I've had the pleasure of drafting a couple of those drafts, sexual orientation strategies from the first one. I presented it to the special advisors way back in 2007.
Yeah,
And the resilience of this sector is the reason why after retiring and coming back as a civil servant that I'm doing what I'm doing as well.
Yeah.
And working with the sector, I believe I have never seen a more resilient group of people, more passionate. Cara is amazing, and there are thankfully many Caras out
yeah.
there that just won't give up. And we can't give up because that's how you eat an elephant, one chunk at a time.
But when that original strategy, Monica, was published for consultation, the Belfast Telegraph wrote an article about it, and I'm trying to see some of the words that they said that had come around tackling issues of concern in respect of health, suicide, education, homophobic bullying, and of
Yeah,
course, we could now add on to that because it wasn't in the article at that time, domestic violence and mental health. And
absolutely.
domestic violence is an issue that is so rife in Northern Ireland. It's horrendously rife in Northern
The
Ireland.
same-sex domestic violence was very
Yes,
much on the radar then.
yeah,
At
yeah,
the time that strategy was being developed, the very first cross between justice and sexual violence strategy was being written,
yeah,
and I had to plead on my knees that somebody considered same sex because we hadn't got the evidence for it. we knew anecdotally it was happening. Anybody that had any sense of the sector knew, but because there was such little stats, and one of my pleas always to the LGBT organisations is keep your footprint, keep your steps. So much better at it now, but unfortunately we weren't particularly then. So it was very hard to evidence
Yeah.
the need. Much better at it now.
You know, and I don't know if you would agree with me on this, but if you take this last 18 years, and if you take the amount of resource that it has cost to run an equality unit, looking at sexual orientation, and you take all those salaries over those years, the cost of the consultations over those years, you know, it's quite a chunk of money. And it's money probably that the sector could have been doing with, really could have been doing with. And I'm trying to be really,
No
really
argument here.
one of my first meetings, which was quite intense, with a community group with that Rainbow had organised for me when I went into that role in equality. And I was saying to Joe that John O'Doherty goldered across the room at me. He was not a happy chappy in this, you know, and he really did. He really did tell me what he thought. And right at the end of the meeting, he came across and he said, Martina, can I give you a hug? You know, none of that was personal. And it was one of the things that I totally embraced about the community. Because what was thought was what was said. And there was nothing personal. And I remember saying to John at the time, because I have the greatest respect for John O'Doherty. I think I have him on a wee pedestal somewhere. We just can't get him off it. We'll eventually get him off it for your next podcast.
Yep.
But there was John, Karen McCann, and like really they've done so much between them. And that's no reflection on whoever's the lovely gentleman that's taken over for John. But I'm just talking about my experience at that time.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant people. And I
Well,
think
this is what you notice about the sector, Martina. I mean, I remember John starting as a policy officer in Rainbow, and you know, Cara volunteering before that. Look at the people that are in the management and on the trustees and whatever around all of these organisations. I think of Adam from Cara Friend, who started as a youth worker. I remember him as a young student, you know, coming into the sector. Steve, you know, they're still doing it despite the failures of government to produce that strategy. This is what I'm talking about, the passion and resilience, the selflessness.
Yeah.
That's what I say. That's why I feel it's a privilege. You know, I mean, I was a civil servant who, you know, all them years ago was on the other side of the fence, and it was me that were having the conversations with. The sign and the resilience of them is that I'm now one of their colleagues.
Yeah.
And you know, because we care, and that comes through. And when you do, that's why you were there. And
Yes.
but we shouldn't have to rely as a country, we shouldn't have to rely on the goodwill of volunteers to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But thank God we have them.
Yeah. And they, like, I really, when you see the same-sex marriage legislation which went through Westminster, that's down to John and Cara and Steve pushing and pushing and pushing. And more power to them. But look at the impact they have had on people. They like really and truly to be able to marry the person you love. Like, my goodness, like I keep trying to divorce the one I'm married to, but he's not having any of it. I'm only joking. I'm joking. Like, it will actually be 42 years this year. And I am joking. We went when I'm sort of diversing here a little bit. We went when we were 40 years married to our favourite place in Donegal, but we always go to see Bod Eddie. And Bod Eddie has been getting worse and worse, you know, on the beach, the boat and it's fallen to pieces. And we got back to our favourite place, and Darren looked at me and he says, can't find my wallet. My wallet's gone. And I said, well, Ger, if you've lost it, you've lost it. It's probably floating halfway to America by now. And cut a long story short, nice people. Somebody found his wallet and handed it into the guard station. We got
Oh,
it back the
wow.
next day.
Brilliant.
Yep. So it didn't go to America.
Excellent. Right, I'm going to stop the recording and then we will have time for some questions or two after.
Oh,
And
before you stop the
yes,
recording,
before stop.
can I just thank everybody who's been on this podcast tonight. Honestly, I feel a privilege even being asked to be part of this podcast. It's a total honor. I still don't know why Joe has asked me to do this, but it is an honor, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. It's an important story and it needs to be told, and may not be the most exciting in the world, but it's the behind the scenes that nobody really gets to see. So we really appreciate the insight, and I hope we get lots of post viewers now on our YouTube channel.